This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one interview. This is about what happens when power decides the truth before evidence exists. Quietly, procedurally, without asking permission, what you are watching is not chaos. It is order, a system working exactly as designed, moving faster than facts can keep up, certainty arriving before questions are allowed to form. There is a moment when accountability still exists. It is brief. And if it is bypassed, it does not come back on its own. That moment passed here, not with a mistake, not with a slip of the tongue, but with confidence, with speed, with the calm assumption that once a story is declared, reality will follow. If you care about how power explains itself when no one is supposed to interrupt, stay with me. Because once this mechanism is visible, you can't unsee it. And what comes next explains why this keeps happening. Not just here, not just now. Here is the mistake most people make. They think systems are run by people. They are not. People rotate. Incentives stay. What actually controls this system is not law or policy or even authority. It is narrative velocity. The speed at which an official version of events is released determines what evidence is allowed to matter later. Once a declaration is made fast enough, it becomes the frame. Everything after that is forced to argue inside it. Video is no longer evidence. It becomes interpretation. Contradictions are no longer problems. They are context. This is why certainty arrives early. Not because the facts are clear, but because ambiguity is dangerous to power. An unanswered question invites scrutiny. A closed story demands deference. So the system does not wait. It speaks first. And by doing that, it quietly reassigns roles. Investigators become validators. The public becomes an audience. And accountability becomes a formality scheduled after the conclusion is already set. This is not about confidence. It's about control. And once you see who benefits from that control, the shift underneath it becomes impossible to ignore. There was a time when waiting mattered, not as courtesy, as structure. Before an incident created questions, questions created investigations, investigations produced conclusions. That order was not accidental. It was the guardrail. Now, the order has reversed. Conclusion first, evidence later. If it fits, this shift did not arrive with an announcement. It arrived as efficiency, as responsiveness, as strength. Faster statements were praised. Decisiveness became a virtue. Hesitation was reframed as weakness. And slowly, something else changed. The public stopped expecting uncertainty, and power stopped tolerating it. What used to be a pause became a gap to be filled. And the fastest voice learned it could fill that gap permanently. Once that became normal, the danger stopped looking dramatic. No tanks, no seedings, just press releases that arrived before the scene was cleared. Labels applied before facts were gathered. Confidence replacing process. This is how a system shifts without resistance, not by breaking rules, but by rearranging their sequence. And once sequence changes, everything downstream starts to bend. Because the first real test of this new order wasn't theoretical. It was concrete, and it was captured on video. Here is where the system met friction. Within hours, not days, not after review, a definitive account appeared. Who acted? Who was justified? Who was to blame? The investigation had not finished beginning. The scene was still active. Evidence was still being collected, but the story was already complete. One person was framed as a threat, another as a protector. Language did the work that process normally does. And the speed mattered, because speed closed doors. By the time questions were asked, they sounded like challenges. By the time video surfaced, it was treated as interpretation. By the time contradictions appeared, they were framed as attacks. This was not an overreach. It was a deployment, a statement issued so early it functioned like gravity. Everything afterward fell toward it. When confronted with the timeline, there was no hesitation, no acknowledgement of uncertainty, just insistence. Certainty was not defended with evidence. It was defended as authority. And that's when the problem became visible. Because once you declare the outcome, the investigation no longer searches for truth. It searches for alignment, and the next piece of evidence made that impossible to ignore. Here is the mechanism most people never see. Once a conclusion is declared, the system reorganizes around it automatically. Not by conspiracy, by incentive. Careers do not advance by contradicting leadership. Agencies do not protect themselves by reopening closed narratives. Risk flows downhill. So evidence is no longer evaluated neutrally. It is filtered. Anything that supports the initial claim is elevated. Anything that complicates it is delayed. Anything that threatens it becomes suspect. This is how benefit is distributed. Those who speak first gain insulation. Those who follow absorb liability. And those harmed by the decision are required to prove doubt in a system that has already decided certainty. This is why video does not end the argument. It relocates it. Instead of asking, what happened? The system asks, how should this be interpreted? And interpretation is flexible. Training, context. Split seconds. All-purpose explanations that require no falsification. This is not justice malfunctioning. This is governance optimized for speed over scrutiny. And once that optimization is in place, the damage does not stop at one case. It accelerates because the next moment arrives faster. Then the footage changed the tempo. 3 shots, not one, not a blur. First through the front, then through the side. By the second and third, the geometry had shifted. The immediate threat was no longer where it had been. That should have slowed everything down. It didn't. Questions came faster. Answers came looser. Training was invoked. Time compression. Stress. Instinct. Notice what was missing. Sequence. Distance. Position. The physical reality on screen was never addressed directly. It was talked around, flooded with abstraction. And when abstraction wasn't enough, something else appeared. Indignation. The question itself became the problem. Scrutiny became hostility. Asking for justification was reframed as attack. This is the acceleration point. When a system stops explaining actions and starts rejecting the need to explain them at all, at that moment, evidence is no longer inconvenient. It is irrelevant. And once relevance disappears, the damage spreads outward. Because the next thing affected is not policy, it's people. This is where it reaches you, not as a headline, not as a debate, as a condition. Because once a system learns it does not have to justify itself, you inherit the uncertainty it refuses to carry. You learn that video may not protect you, that timing matters more than truth, that labels can arrive faster than facts. You are told this is about safety, about order, about trust. But what you experience is distance. Distance between what you see and what you are told happened. Distance between questions and answers. Distance between accountability and consequence. And when that distance appears, it doesn't announce itself. It normalizes. You stop expecting clarity. You stop expecting correction. You are trained to accept confidence instead. If this feels uncomfortable, it should. Because systems don't collapse when people panic. They collapse when people adjust. If you want to understand where this is heading, stay with me. Share this. Not for outrage, for awareness. Because this mechanism does not stop at one jurisdiction. It travels. Once this mechanism stabilizes, it doesn't stay contained. Other systems watch. Other governments learn. Other institutions adapt. Because the lesson is transferable. Speed beats scrutiny. Certainty beats process. Narrative beats evidence. What begins as a local decision framework becomes a template, a way to manage unrest, a way to neutralize dissent without appearing to do so. Internationally, this looks like alignment. Domestically, it feels like inevitability. Different languages, same sequence, an incident, a declaration, a delay framed as danger. And once multiple systems adopt this rhythm, something else happens. Correction becomes expensive. Reversal becomes destabilizing. Admitting error threatens legitimacy itself, so the system doubles down, not because it is malicious, but because retreat now costs more than advance. At that point, accountability is no longer a value. It is a risk factor, and risks are managed, which brings us to the future. Not as a prediction, but as a set of trajectories, none of them neutral. From here, there are 3 paths, none of them clean. The first is adjustment. The system acknowledges the strain without admitting fault. Language is softened. Procedures are renamed. Oversight is promised, carefully scoped, safely delayed. The structure remains intact. Only the edges are smoothed. This path preserves stability, but at the cost of truth. Nothing breaks. Nothing heals. The second is erosion. Confidence continues to replace process. Each incident chips away at credibility. Not enough to trigger collapse. Just enough to hollow trust. People disengage. They stop expecting accountability. They adapt to ambiguity. The system keeps functioning, but no longer convincingly. The third is rupture. A moment arrives where narrative speed fails, where evidence overwhelms framing, where certainty cannot outrun documentation. Correction becomes unavoidable. And because it was delayed too long, it is violent, institutional, political, legal. No one chooses this path. It emerges when the others are exhausted. Right now, all 3 exist at once, competing, unresolved. Which one becomes dominant depends on what happens next, and on whether this mechanism stays invisible, because once it's seen, it can't operate the same way again. Nothing here resolves cleanly. There is no reveal that fixes the system, no statement that restores sequence, no correction that travels as fast as the original declaration. What remains is a choice most systems avoid naming. Whether truth is something discovered or something announced, if certainty continues to arrive first, accountability becomes ceremonial. Investigations become decoration. Evidence becomes optional. And the danger is not that this feels dramatic. It's that it feels efficient, professional, normal, until the moment you need the system to wait, to hesitate, to ask instead of declare. And if you're still here, you already understand why this matters. Not because of one case, but because of what it teaches power it can get away with. Stay engaged. Follow this thread, because the next time this mechanism activates, it may not be as visible, and by then, the window where sequence still matters may already be gone.